Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of The Beth Effect. I am sat here with one of my favorite people ever in my entire corporate life, Todd Reed, who is the former SVP, Senior Vice President of Sales and Training at Allergan. You retired last year, Todd, which is a huge hit for me, but great for you. After 37 years at Allergan, thanks so much for joining me this week.
I'm thrilled we're doing this. And I would be remiss if I didn't say congratulations to you. Third straight Manager of the Year award. I don't know that that's ever happened at Allergan.
I don't know.
I don't think it has.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And I may be wrong, but I'm sure that that's very rarefied air. But I'm pretty sure nobody's ever won it 3 times in a row. So congratulations.
Thank you. I honestly have a really, really good team. So
yeah, sounds like it.
thanks to them. Okay, so Todd, I want you to start off talking me through how your career started at Allergan. Just tell me a little bit about your background, kind of, for lack of a better term, credential yourself, so that those that aren't familiar with aesthetics, really we're actually listening to the godfather of aesthetics right now, but let's just let them know what led you to that point.
I don't know about the whole Godfather thing, but I graduated from college in 1986, and I was either going to be a basketball coach or I was going to go be a graduate assistant in college basketball, but then I got offered a job with Allergan. I had no idea what Allergan did, but they offered me a company car. So I didn't have a company car. I didn't have a car at the time. So I'm like, I'm taking this job because they pay for your gas. And I didn't really know what Allergan did at that time, but it was an eye care company, and I was in the contact lens division. So there was no aesthetics. This was 37 years ago. Allergan was the number one eye care company, and then at that time, they bought a contact lens company, and I was the first employee to go from Allergan to what was then called Allergan Hydron, and I sold bifocal contact lenses.
So you worked for Allergan, and then when they purchased a company, you went into that new company to work.
Yeah, I was the first Allergan person to go over to that the new company.
How was that?
Oh, it was fantastic. I was young. I had just gotten married and selling device type products and commission, and I had a big territory. I loved it, and I did really well there. And then the big thing then is if you could go into training at Allergan, that was the biggest deal. And what's a little bit different now is like when a training job came open, we would always have like 2 or 3 candidates go for it. Back in the day, everybody wanted to go into training because it was the only way you could become a district manager. So I became a sales trainer for a year.
Okay.
And Tammy and I moved to California for a year.
Wow, in Irvine?
Yeah.
Okay.
We lived in Irvine for a year.
And so then you could become a district manager.
Yeah. Then I became the district manager in Chicago.
Wow. How long did you live in Chicago?
I was the district manager there for 4 years.
Okay. And then when did you move back to Denver?
So when I was a district manager, I actually also took a national account manager job there, a managed care job during that 4 years. And then my dad got sick. So at that point, I was like, I have to move back to Denver. And I remember we went to a national sales meeting, and I visited my parents on the way out there. And I got to the meeting in Arizona, and I called Tammy and told her, I said, I just resigned. We're moving back to Denver. And because I wanted to get back, my dad was sick. And I went to the people at Allergan and said, here's the situation, and it's one of the reasons I was so loyal to Allergan for so long. They created a district manager job for me in Denver.
Oh, so they could keep you. And you could move back.
Yeah, moved back to Denver, and I was a district manager for a couple years, and then I went to our consulting group. So I was a consultant for a while, and then I became the regional vice president in eye care, and I did that for 2 or 3 years.
So then 20 years into Allergan, with all these different consulting, sales, leadership, and training roles, and then they come to you and say, hey, could you go start off the aesthetics division?
Yeah, well, nothing was called aesthetics at that time. So
what was it called?
It was called the Botox division.
Okay.
And it was very funny because the head of the organization at that time, they had asked me to move to California to run the eye care division. And I wasn't able to move at that time. So then they came to me and they said, we'd like you to go over and run the sales organization for this new division we have, Botox, and we'll let you live in Denver, but you're going to have to commute back and forth. And so I was very interested in that, but I also kind of wondered about it. In a way, I thought I was getting let go. I thought they were trying to get rid of me because they were taking me out of the biggest division in the company and putting me into this little division that nobody had ever even heard of. I mean, Botox had just been approved about a year before that. There was only 8 sales reps in the organization. So I was like, what are they trying to get me to go into? And so it was 8 or 10 or 12 reps at that time, but best move I ever made. I loved it.
At what point, so you came in, managed the whole Botox team in the whole country was 8 to 10 people. At what point when you started building the division, which is now medical aesthetics, I think it was Allergan's largest division.
Yeah, it was Allergan's. It's not AbbVie's largest.
No, but I think it was Allergan's at the time. So at what point did you recognize that it was going to be huge?
I don't know exactly when that was, to be honest with you. I knew that once we got into it, and I think the first time we expanded the sales force, so we went from the 10, 12-ish people up to somewhere in the 36, 40 range, and the business just started growing at a really rapid rate. And at the same time, then filler started coming to the market, so there was more offerings in aesthetics, and I was like, number one, this is a lot of fun because it's a very different kind of sale than selling pharmaceuticals, and I loved that because we were helping people build their practices, and so I knew that it was going to be big. Did I ever know it was going to be as big?
Yeah.
No, I can't. I got to be honest. I didn't know it would be as big as it became.
Was there a moment in your career, because as Botox and just medical aesthetics with Allergan grew, because we had Botox filler, then we brought in cool sculpting, Schematica, there's breast implants, there's the whole, the plastic side of the business too with the regenerative medicine. As long as I was with the company, so 10 years ago, I remember walking into a national sales meeting and there's that room's full of 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Maybe, because it's not just your sales rep, it's your marketing team, your training teams. And I remember you getting up on stage. Was there not a moment? I mean, obviously, there was a lot of growth in that time to get to the point where it was as big as it was. But was there ever a moment where you're like, wow, I'm the head of this division, leading just 1,000 people in this room?
Oh, sure. There were a lot of times when I was like, God, I wish my wife and kids could see that I actually have a real job and that people listen to me. But yeah, as it got bigger and bigger, there were pluses and minuses to it, though. I mean, there was a sweet spot when it was primarily just the facial side, and I think we had just brought on Skin Medica, and at that point, I knew everybody. I knew everybody's names, and it's one of my few things I'm really good at is I remember people's names and faces, and I knew everyone. And then as it got bigger and bigger, that was harder to do. So that was that was a challenge. And then, the other part is it was incredibly successful, and that wasn't due to me. There's a lot of really good people in the organization, in marketing and all the different aspects. Allergan just had some really good people that made it successful. But I think the thing that really stood out to me and is when I first went into management, my first district manager job, I was horrible. I was a terrible district manager.
Did you know at the time you were horrible, or now looking back, do you recognize that you were horrible?
Oh, both. I got a very big, I got a very rude awakening about it. So, do you want me to tell you the story about it?
Yes.
So I'm the district manager in Chicago, and I had watched other people, and I said to myself, I am not going to be a micromanager. I am, not going to do all the things they tell you not to do as a manager. And so I went into the job, and my team was doing really well. I took over a very tenured team with people. Everybody on the team was older than I was. Mm-hmm. And because
was that hard?
Yeah, that was difficult.
It's a different dynamic, right? When you're the district manager, but you're the youngest employee, it is a bit of a weird dynamic sometimes. It
was a weird dynamic, and candidly, I was really cocky, and so I go into this role, and I'm like, I just spent a whole year in the home office, and I'm coming out here, and my goal was, I wanted to rule the world, and so I took over this team of very tenured, very talented people, and one of the reps came to me and basically said, hey, I need to talk to you. And we were doing pretty well from a performance standpoint. Yeah. And I had all belief that she was going to come and tell me,
you're doing a good job, Todd.
Good job. We're so glad you're here. And she came to me, and her exact words were, you are the single worst manager I've ever had. She's been with the company for 15 years. She said, you're the worst manager I've ever had. The entire team cannot stand you, and you're about to lose everybody.
Oh.
And so that was kind of a wake-up call on how to lead and manage people, or actually how not to lead and manage people.
How did you turn it around?
Well, so at that point, I either could have just said, you know what, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, or at that point, I'm like, God, I must not be very good at this. And I talked to my father about it, and he's like, well, you need to look into what's going on. So I went to HR, and HR said, well, let's do a 360-degree survey. We did the 360. It was brutal. And I was a micromanager. Nobody trusted me. They didn't think I trusted them. I focused on all the wrong stuff. And the biggest thing that came out of that whole scenario for me is we then had a meeting afterwards to review the 360, and that's painful. That's painful.
It's really humbling, I'm sure, to be like, because how much of your time how much of your day spent, even though you were awful at it, Todd, it still was a lot of your time spent on something that you thought you were doing a good job at. Obviously, you need to hear that feedback, but it's still quite humbling to sit there and be like, oh, this thing that I've been investing all my time in and thought I was doing a good job at, and actually I'm terrible at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very eye-opening. And in hindsight, when I look back on that kid who didn't know what he was doing, what I'm proud of is how I took the feedback, because I'm actually kind of surprised that I took the feedback as well as I did. And then I learned what I needed to improve. And I also I learned that you can learn to be a good leader. You can learn to be a good manager of people. It's innate for some people, but in most cases, it's something that you can definitely learn.
We have a little dog guest.
Oh, my dog Archie just joined us.
Perfect. It's very quiet.
But yeah, so at that point, I was like, I'm going to learn how to be better at this because I liked it. Mm-hmm. And is he bothering you?
No, not at all.
Okay. So that's my dog Archie. I started reading more. I took some courses, things like that, and I got better at it.
So I'm going to challenge you a little bit on that, because I think anyone can learn how to be a good leader, but you actually had to want to learn.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people would have got, not a lot, some people would have got that hard feedback and found a way to blame it on the reps and use excuses and not have taken it as an area of opportunity and then gone and did what you did. That's not a universal trait. So
no, and I'm actually proud of that kid.
Yeah.
Who, instead of, like I said, you can go one of two paths, and I took the path of taking accountability for it and trying to get better. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it surprises me I did that, but I'm glad that I did. And a lot of the stuff I learned from that team is what I incorporated moving forward, and it's helped me through all different types of situations and positions.
So to give some perspective for the organization, all of the different division VPs reported into you for sales, but then also you had training as well, reporting into you. Why did you choose, because it was a choice in your career, at Allergan, there's like the whole sales channel, then we have a whole marketing channel, and then a finance channel. And why did you choose to stay for 37 years in sales and training?
Well, training was a big deal to me. Part of it is because I needed training when I went into the different roles, and coaching was always a big part of my life. So, outside of work, I've coached basketball the entire time. Mm-hmm. And so the training thing was always going to be important to me. I liked the whole customer component to it, and I liked sales because I liked the meritocracy of sales, that the better you do, the more money you can make, the more your career can move forward. But I was just always very focused on sales. I spent a lot of time in the corporate office, and in my job I had to, but I was more of a field salesperson.
Like out in front of the customers and with the sales reps.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. Okay, so when it came to obviously starting the medical aesthetics division and then growing it, you had to hire a lot of leaders underneath you. What attributes, or what was it that you looked for when you hired your leaders?
Yeah, that really changed through the years, but I will tell you where I've really settled on hiring people. The number one thing that I think for a leader to be successful is you have to build trust with the people that work for you. They have to trust you. But then the other part of that I think people overlook a lot of times is you have to trust them. And and what comes out of that, when managers don't trust their people, they micromanage, and micromanaging can just kill an organization. Mm-hmm. And you end up focusing on the wrong things as opposed to the end result. So being able to build trust is really important, but also you need to find people that can trust, because they have to enable people to do things their own way. One of the biggest mistakes I made many times, but really when I was that first-time district manager, is I wanted to hire everybody the same as me. And I wanted everybody to do things the exact same way I did things. And that's a recipe for disaster. And then I got to the point where you really have to manage, you really have to have different ways of thinking. You have to have people that do things different ways, and that's okay. It actually makes the team stronger when there's that type of diversity in a team. And so getting back to it, I'd look for people that could build trust but also give trust. One of the key attributes that makes that possible is, are you humble and vulnerable? So at the beginning when I would recruit people, I would just want to know their success stories. Tell me about all the great things that you've done.
Yeah.
And that's what most interviews are like.
The highlight reel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'll tell you now, and probably in the last 15 years, I've really changed. I want to know how people handle adversity. So are people vulnerable? Can they tell you when they screwed up? Are they humble to tell you when they screwed up? Mm-hmm. Do they take accountability for things that they screwed up? Because the bottom line is, in business, in life, in everything, it's peaks and valleys, and it's how you handle the low times, which really determine if you're a good leader. Anybody can lead in good times. So I really look for people that are humble and vulnerable. The other piece that comes into play is just what type of perspective people have. So can they see two sides of a situation? Because you're never always going to get your way.
No, sadly.
And even though you'd like to always get your way, it's important that you can always understand someone else's point of view. Mm-hmm. And when you're leading people too, and the organization is making decisions, you have to be able to understand. You may not agree with it, but you have to understand why they're making that decision, because you have to communicate it to people. So I really look for people with a lot of perspective, and then, just basic stuff like work ethic. You really have to model the way. If I want people to work hard,
yes,
they have to see that I work hard. And more importantly, if I want people to work smart, they have to see that I work smart. And that whole working hard thing is a whole different category that, I've grown in, because I think working hard is important, but in the right aspect.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment, because you can work hard at something that also, you can be in sales and work really hard at a project that doesn't bring in any value or like revenue generating activity. It's almost like working hard at the three things that job needs to get done, and working really hard at those things, which would be working smart, because that's, it's just, you can get really distracted on side projects, but at the end of the day, if it's not the number one thing that you've been hired to do, like look at some leaders will go and work really hard on so many different projects, but then their team gets missed. And that's, as a manager, the number one thing you need to do is make sure your team's taken care of, right? So,
that's right.
And performing. So it's not one or the other. It's not black and white. No.
And there are a lot of people that work really hard, but they work really hard on the wrong things. And so, my opinion of all that changed through the years as well. Is I was more interested in people getting results, people being good people to work with, people that you could trust, as opposed to just somebody that works super hard all the time. But you have to be able to demonstrate those things too if you expect other people to do them.
Did you find, as time went on, like obviously we all get things wrong sometimes. Like I used to be in corporate recruiting before I came to Allergan, and there's nothing more humbling than when you realize you've made a bad hire.
Yes.
That's the worst feeling ever. But have there been times, I've not experienced this because I'm not high up in an organization like you were, but were there times where you would make leadership hires and then realize that person that you hired was really good at managing up, but not very good at the actual job you needed them to be in?
Definitely. I made that mistake all the way up to the last day I worked. And that's something that you really have to look out for. Is there are some people that are exceptional at managing up. Mm-hmm. And I missed the boat on that many times. But the biggest thing to me was I wanted people that were servant leaders, that wanted to be, they were just part of the team. And it's always understood that who's the boss, who's not the boss. But I wanted people working for me that treated everybody like their peers. And I I think that's really important, and that's how you build trust. If you're always like, I'm the boss and you're going to do what I say, it's hard to build a team or a culture when you do stuff like that. But yeah, did I have people that managed up and people would have to come and tell me you're missing the boat on this? Yeah, it happened my entire career.
I remember I had a manager once who was like impeccable at managing up at Allergan. They always knew who to make sure that they were in the right rooms for, but then whenever there was something to be celebrated, they wouldn't ever celebrate with us in the team. They would always be at either with you or with like someone higher up that could get them. So they were always in that group, but they were never with us on the nights when we were celebrating. And now my boss that I have right now, whenever there's a win and the team is celebrating, she's with us. Like, she's like, I don't care if so-and-so invited me to go join this or that. Like, this is our night. Like, we're celebrating together. And that always speaks volumes to like the team environment where you're just like, you know, it can be really lonely in leadership because you still have your own career and you still care about stuff, but you're responsible for them. But then you also are not quite one of them. And then you're not quite, it can be really lonely sometimes.
Yeah.
It can be a really lonely thing. And then the question of, are you just wanting to come with me to this because you're brown nosing or because you actually enjoy my company? It's just, it can be a lonely ride.
Oh, no question. And so when people would ask me like, you know, how much do you manage up versus manage down? And I always got to the ratio, and it varied over a period of time, but I kind of got to the ratio where it was, you have to be able to manage up. So it's just part of the corporate world. So how I would put that ratio is 20% of your time should be managing up, 80% should be working with the people that are your peers or below. And because the one thing is you do have to be able to, you have to have respect of the people above you in order to get things done. But the most valuable thing you can have is the people that are your peers or that work for you, supporting you. And that was always, I always looked for that with people, is how did the people that worked for them feel about them, but also how did their peers feel about them? Because the higher you go up in any company, collaboration and how you work with others is just so important. And you really see, there's some people that are very good managers of people, but they can't get along with any of their peers. And that makes it really difficult as well.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I first started out in corporate America, it wasn't at Allergan, but my boss was the VP of recruiting, and she was 65, close to retiring. It was just, she was in Calabasas. She's a crazy old lady. I loved her. Her name was Carol.
Okay, be careful. That's not too far off from me.
I, at the time, was 25. So to me, it seemed old at the time. But she said, like, she was telling me, you know, where do you want to go one day? And I was like, I want to be a VP like you one day, Carol. And she said, okay, right now you feel like your loyalty is to people, and that's great. But the higher up you get at a company, your loyalty is to the company. So first and foremost, you have to protect the company and then protect the people. But she's like, that ends up being really difficult for someone who loves being around people and loves camaraderie. To your point, there's a period of time where like your loyalty needs to be in protecting the company. I think that's what makes leadership also lonely sometimes, is like, listen, it is the way that it is, and I can't change it because this is what the company needs. And I know I'm delivering this bad news, and there's nothing else I can say other than it is what it is. And you want to be able to be liked in those moments, and you're definitely not. And you know you're not. And it's just, that's also lonely when you're delivering the bad news to your people, and then you feel like you're also delivering bad news to the company. Sometimes that middle management line feels like you're just getting beaten up on both sides.
Oh, middle management
feel that way.
Middle management's the hardest job there is, because you are getting it from both sides. But if you've built trust with your team, then they will accept bad news from you because they trust you. And is one of the big things that I always told people when they came into management roles. It's honestly easier to just support the people that work for you all the time, and to be an advocate of the organization is more challenging, because you don't want the people that work for you always just saying, oh, they're just towing the company line. And but the really good leaders and managers can be an advocate for the organization, but then also a complete advocate for the people that work for them.
That's where your trust piece is key, because if they trust you, you can explain, here's why it's the way that it is. And you may not agree with it, but this is why the company needs it to be this way. And there is that trust, where they understand it. But it is easier to do that in an intimate sales group of 8 to 10. You would have to, at times, and I will never forget this, get up on stage to a room of thousands and deliver bad sales numbers or bad news. And you would do it in a way that I remember sitting in the audience and listening to you and being like, wow, I'm so inspired. Like, you're right, Todd, we've got to just go fight harder, instead of being like, oh, okay. Like, how did you do that? How did you find a way to deliver bad news or stern news when it isn't in an intimate room of people that you have that trust built, and it's a whole room of thousands of people? How did you do that?
Well, I don't think just giving
keep going.
Oh, I don't, just giving a message one time to people that have never heard you, are they necessarily going to buy into what you're saying? I think it takes a lot of work before that. So, when you look at building culture's built from the ground up, not the ground down. And, there's a lot of people that are really good at speaking and PowerPoint presentations, and that's important. But it's more important that you build trust and culture kind of one person at a time. And so what helped me after a period of time was, if I had to deliver bad news and then somebody in the audience said, is this guy full of shit, or is this guy really looking out for us? And it makes a big difference if that person sitting there goes, no, he's telling the truth and you can trust him.
Yeah. And
then as that word spreads, then people will start to listen to you when you're like, hey, this is not going well. But there's reasons for it, and there's also things we need to do better, but we all need to get behind that. And when everybody or a majority of the people in the crowd are going, you know what, he cares about us, or she cares about us, then it's much more easy to accept that type of stuff. And, the big thing that I did, whether it was good or bad, and I was just always transparent. I just told people
you were,
how it was.
I think we appreciated that. And it also sometimes even made it funny how transparent you were. Like, yeah, okay, well, this number behind me right now doesn't look good. So let's do better, And I think that there's a way to acknowledge. You would always acknowledge things, be very transparent. Here's what's going well. Here's what's not going well. Here's what we need to go change. But then always leaving with it with, but you guys can do it. Like, this is the number one sales force in medical aesthetics. So if anyone can do it, you guys can. So it's like ending with that. You always made us laugh, even through the bad news. And then I always left national sales meeting being like, okay, yeah, we can do this. Like, you've got like your wind under your wings to like go deal with whatever that year. And it was always different every year. It was always something every single
Well, and there's always problems.
Always.
Nothing ever goes perfect. Never. So it's just acknowledging the things that aren't going well, and hopefully you've built some trust with people. And then a big part of leadership is inspiring people, that you can inspire people to go do stuff.
I think there's a huge difference between inspiring and motivating. And I love that you use the word inspire, because it's such a it's just a different way versus motivation is like a fear of like, okay, we'll go do this task. Inspiring to just show the art of what it could be. Everyone was in it together is a big deal. I would say the culture at Allergan like was one of my favorite. It was, you know, sitting there in my first national sales meeting ever, watching the of the years go up on stage and being like inspired and just being in that room with all that talent, but then also having it. I mean, my eldest was 9 months old when I started at Allergan, and I have 3 kids and my youngest is 6. Like my eldest is going to be 11 this year. So I feel like my whole motherhood journey has tied in with my whole career at Allergan, and I've loved it. And there's been, I think the thing that's kept me there through the hard years has been the culture, and that has also come from the top down with you. How did you, I mean, it's, if you can even pinpoint one thing, but probably not. How did you maintain that culture as we got bigger and bigger and it's harder to do? And we went through 2 acquisitions, 3 acquisitions in the time. How did you maintain the Allergan family feeling like it was still an Allergan family?
Not exactly sure. And, you know, there were times when that culture varied, but I think just staying true to the basic principles, like we just talked about, is building it up from the bottom, getting people to trust you. But the other thing that I really focused on is my belief around the whole work-life thing is people work because they want to have their own self-satisfaction. There's no question about it. But in the other part, people work because they want to support their families. And they have to pay bills. They have to pay for their kids to go to soccer, and they have to take care of sick parents and stuff like that. So it was always really important to me that we acknowledge the fact that we appreciate that you work here, but we also know that you have a family to take care of, and that's probably the main reason you're here. So we can talk about the work family, which I think is real and can be very important, but it's your family at home that's really your biggest motivator. And so I always took a big position around that family first, always family first. So if you have, there's no situation ever at work that would overcome something that was critical at home. And, you know, I just really pushed that through the whole organization. I remember, and I don't know how controversial this is now, or it was then, but, you know, we had a 80% female sales organization. And when you have an 80% female sales organization, people have babies.
Lots of babies.
So we, at every meeting, we celebrated babies. And I was like, we love babies here. And every single baby that was born in Allergan Aesthetics got a baby blanket from me for 20 years.
I have 2 of them.
Yeah. And, you know, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but people want to know that you understand their family's the most important thing. And I think that grew from a little organization to the big thing because, you know, let's be real. If somebody just had a baby, that's a heck of a lot more important than whether they hit their sales numbers.
Every NSM, they put up all of the baby faces and the weddings and like any of, obviously we celebrate all like work anniversaries, but I remember that. Like we would always put the babies that were born that year and like, you know, when they were and who the parents were up on the screen. And then also the weddings. That was another thing too, that like they always went up on the screen so that some of the men could get their names up there too.
They kind of made fun of me at the end because they're like, you spend so much time just celebrating babies and weddings and anniversaries. Because I made a big deal out of people's work anniversaries too. Yeah. Because if somebody's going to stay in an organization for 5, 10, 15. We had so many people that stayed in the organization 20, 25 years. That person, he or she, has been incredibly loyal to the organization. They've obviously done a really good job. and you need to celebrate that loyalty to the company.
Yeah.
So those things were really important, and I think it helped.
It did. And I remember there's two things I remember from you. One is that you would say, if someone stays here for 5 years, the likelihood of us getting them for the next 5 is really high.
Yeah.
Like that first 5 years are critical. And Allergan, thanks to you and all of the people that you put in training, does such a great job in training.
Yeah.
We invest heavily into training our people. So at that 5-year mark too, like the amount of time and energy that's gone into getting them where they're at. And then you always would have this saying to match what you just said about people's family coming first, as you would say at the end of your close of every meeting was, take care of yourselves first, your family second, and your customers third.
Yeah.
And I used that in my first year as an RM. It was our seminar, which cost like $15,000 to put on, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's budget and all these things. And one of the sales reps at the time, it was her seminar, and I was out there with her, and her son, we were in Reno, and they live in Las Vegas, and her son was 4 at the time, and the nanny called, and he had 103 fever and was sick. And I remember being like, like, okay, well, we need her here, but like, if it was my kid, I would be on the first flight home. So I just told her, I was like, I'm not even giving you an option. You have to go. And she was like all nervous. And I said, I use you. And I said, what does Todd say at every NSM? Like, this is what we stand for. Just go home. And we made it work. I mean, it wasn't, we stumbled through it. We only knew that it wasn't what was planned. The customers didn't. But at the end of the day, she was where she needed to be for sure. And I mean, how loyal would she be to us as a company if we were forcing her to stay there with her?
Exactly.
4-year-old boy who was home with a fever. Like, but that's not always that common. Sadly, a lot of people would work and not have gone home because they didn't feel like they had a choice. So creating that culture where people felt like they could go be with their families over work is key. So
yeah, that was super important to me.
Yeah, I appreciate it, because there were many times where I was able to be home. In fact, I was always home with my kids in the sales jobs I was in. That's why I waited to get into leadership till they were older. I could always be home with them. So I appreciate that. Okay, last 2 questions, Todd. What advice would you give to current leaders out there listening, or CEOs, or people who want to be future leaders that are struggling with culture and leadership right now? What is just a piece of advice you would give them?
A couple, because there's so many things out there about culture, and you can look up so many things, but 2 things that I think come into play is there was always the adage that bothered me that was, I don't care if you like me or not, but I just want you to respect me. And I don't think that goes that far. I think you need to get to know people, and I think if you want to build culture, you need to get to know the people that work for you, both personally and professionally. And some people will let you in more than others, and that's the line that you have to really understand. Some people don't want you to get to know them too well personally. I've never really experienced a whole lot of that. Most people want you to know about their lives, and unless you know about their lives, it's really hard to understand what their needs, values, and motivations are. So I would say, get to know the people that work for you. And, I think it's important to know their wives, know their children, stuff like that. And then the other thing, which is, this sounds so dumb to a lot of people, but you have to make the work experience fun.
I don't think that sounds dumb.
It has to be, you have to have some fun. And fun is not forced fun. So sometimes companies do all these forced fun things, like
cringe,
with really good intentions. But fun is more off the cuff. Fun is more one-on-one. Fun is laughing at mistakes that are made and laughing at each other. Fun is recognizing when their 8-year-old kid won a soccer game that really doesn't matter, but that's fun. Fun is not, okay, we are all going to go to a clue room. That can be fun, but it's also...
We're going to go around and share one fun fact about each other. Have you seen those memes that,
yes.
like, I'd rather jump off a roof than have to answer that question in Teams call?
Forced fun, forced team building, I am not a fan of. But I'm a real big fan of team building, and you can do that in a much more casual environment. We had every year... I had my management team up in the mountains, Camp Reed, and the whole thing is we would spend 4 hours a day on business, and then we would spend the rest of the time on how do we get to know each other, how do we get to trust each other. But there was no forced fun around it. It wasn't like we had assignments. It was just, and one of the things that really kind of became a big deal for people is it was as simple as, okay, so who's responsible for breakfast, who's responsible for lunch, and when you have to make a meal with somebody else, it's a whole different...
I mean, it's basically like Survivor.
Yeah, but it was never, and I'm sure there were people at those going, why are we doing this? But I'm not a big fan of forced fun. So, get to know people, make sure that the work environment's fun, and then just be trustworthy. Sometimes you have to tell people bad news, and it's important that you just are straight around that. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, because life's just too short not to have fun. And even I see it with the reps too that have lasted a long time. And I look at like how they've powered through, and most of the time it's from the bond that they formed with their coworkers, and they sit and they laugh about those times afterwards. Like I remember in one division I was in, we went through a downsizing, and we had to do a team meeting in Irvine right after the downsizing. And so we decided to just rent a Duffy boat and go out on the Duffy boat. And our VP at the time, who drove it for us. And I don't know how much we had to drink on that Duffy boat, but I do know that he hit a yacht while we were driving. And
I think I heard about that.
Yeah, and we stumbled out afterwards. That night was so much fun. There was no work talk. It was just all fun, and everyone was just having a good time. It's still something that the people were all in different places now at Allergan. We've all our careers have all gone different ways, but every time we see each other, we reference the Duffy boat. And that was in one of probably the hardest and scariest times of our career, if we look back at it, because we had just all been displaced a little bit and had to form new teams. But it was the fun, to your point. I've not thought of that before, and it's such a good takeaway, because that I instantly can think of all of those times as I like replay my career, and the times that I had fun are the times that have like bonded me with the leaders and the team that I was with at the time. So
you spend more time with people at work a lot of times during different times than you do with your own family. So you have to make sure that it's fun.
Yeah. I mean, that's a sometimes sad fact, but it's a true one. Okay. Last question as we wrap this up. Just share with me. I know there's lots of things that you probably are proud of over the course of your career to this point. But what's one thing that you would say you're the most proud of as you look back?
Well, professionally, I'm proud of, the Allergan Aesthetics did really well, and I was part of that. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were part of that.
Big part of it, though.
Well, that's nice of you to say, but there was a lot of people that made Allergan Aesthetics successful. I'm very proud of that, and it's still, the leading aesthetics company in the world, and I don't work there anymore, but I have nothing but great love for that place and the people there, and I want them all to be successful. But professionally, what I am most proud of is, I helped create an environment where people wanted to come to work, wanted to stay, and it allowed them to make a good living. Mm-hmm. And it's so important to me that the people that worked for me and, grew up at Allergan like I did, they were able to send their kids to college. They were able to buy houses. Those are the things that I'm really proud of professionally. But I will tell you the the thing that I'm most proud of is, and this is kind of weird, but what I'm most proud of is between my two kids, between high school basketball, club basketball, my older one played in college, my younger one's about to play in college, but there were probably 500 basketball games. And
club basketball, I believe it.
And out of 500 basketball games, I can tell you I maybe missed 8, 9 of them.
Wow.
And my older daughter, when she played in college, she played all over the country. She played over 100 games, and I missed 2. And so I always, I kind of practiced what I preached is family first, and I didn't miss anything at work. And
wow, that is an incredible achievement.
So I'm very proud of that. And it was important to me because when I played sports, my parents always came, and I remembered that more than anything. And my kids don't really know what I did. I mean, my younger daughter still tells people I sold makeup, but they remember the fact that I'm always there. And so that's what I'm most proud of. That's
huge. I didn't know that. I mean, we're in club volleyball with a 10-year-old, and that alone is kicking our butt. So if you didn't miss anything in club basketball, then collegiate basketball, I mean, that's a lot. And also that's great that you were able to balance it all.
Well, and also to Allergan's credit, there were many times when my daughter would have a game and I would fly back for the game. Then I'd fly back to Irvine for a meeting, and then she'd have a game the next night and I'd fly back. And the company, was great about that. So I think that's important too, is being in a culture that allows you to put family first. But yeah, and it was very important to my kids that took place. And so that's what I'm most proud of.
Well, I thank you so much for letting me come to your house and record this podcast. I always joke, I always tell Brad, I obviously knew who you were for the last 10 years of my career, but I don't think you knew who I was until I handed you some hot tamales one day in a meeting, behind me, and I was like, hey, do you want some of these? Because it's the only thing that's going to keep me awake in this meeting that we were in. But I want you to know that you greatly impacted my career. And even though, you can't always put a face to names, there were so many of us, there were lots of moments. I can think of a lot of different moments throughout my career as a sales rep, as a consultant, as an RM, where I sat and had literally thought, okay, and then your words would come in my mind, and that helped direct me to what I should do in that moment. So you've made a huge impact in my life, and I'm so grateful. And I'm grateful that you let me come crash your Tuesday afternoon to record, because I think you have so much to share, and there are a lot of leaders that need to hear what you have to share. And you have there's a lot that people, I've been lucky because you worked for the company I worked for, but there are people outside of that company that need to hear your voice. So where can they find you, Todd, if they want to hear more from you?
Well, I am actually starting to do a podcast with a good friend of mine, Jake Laban, called Injecting Leadership.
Amazing news, Injecting Leadership. They can find you on Instagram
and Spotify.
Okay, perfect.
And so those are going to start to be released in March. And then I am part of TWR Aesthetic Consulting, which is my consulting company. And so I'm working with different people and companies and stuff like that. But no, thank you for doing this. And obviously your career is going exceptionally well. And so you're really good at what you do. And I feel very fortunate that you asked me to be on this.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've learned a lot. I'm excited for the listeners. Thanks for listening today, guys. And if you like this episode, please subscribe, and share it with people that you feel would benefit from the message. And if you want more behind the scenes look, go to @the Beth Clifford on Instagram. And we'll be back next week with a new episode. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you.